So everything started from a simple joke on Instagram.
I have a joke. A SQL query walks into a bar, walks up to two tables and asks, "Can I join you?"
And then this comment appeared, asking me to explain the joke.
Can you explain the joke, please? I also want to laugh.
I decided to do the worst thing ever. Explaining the joke. But for that, we will need to start over and ask the question, what is SQL or SQL? And to understand what SQL is, I need to explain to you what a database is. And welcome on this small YouTube video where I'm gonna explain what SQL and a database is. So even for people who doesn't have any knowledge on programming, I would love to know if you understood everything that I will explain. So don't hesitate to put a comment and to tell me if you liked it or not. Enjoy! A database is an organized collection of data or a type of data store. You can see it as a big folder where you store data, structured or not. And yeah, because it would be so easy to stop the definition just here. There are a ton of different types of databases, but today we only use a few of them and we can separate them into two groups. The relational databases and the non-relational databases, also called the NoSQL databases. Here, we're gonna focus only on the relational databases, which mainly use SQL, the key point of the joke. A relational database is a type of database where the data is stored into multiple tables, which can be seen as Excel sheets.
Welcome to the Microsoft Excel World Championship!
Inside every table, the data will be stored as rows representing entities and columns representing properties. Let's try an example. In a school, you have students. So let's create our first entities, the students table. But what defines a student? Well, they have a first name, a last name, a birth date. You might even want to have the parent's phone number, for example. These are the properties, the columns of our students table. But in a school, students are organized into classes. For example, year 1, year 2, year 3, etc. So let's create another entity, the classes table. What defines a class? Well, it has a name, a classroom location, a main teacher, for example. Now here's where it gets interesting. Now here's where it gets interesting. We need to think about the relationship between these two identities. A student belongs to a class, but a class can have multiple students. This is what we call a one-to-many relationship in SQL. And you have to know that it exists more different kind of relationship in SQL, but this is not the subject of this video. So now we have our two tables, students and classes. Each table stores its own specific data, and the relationship between them is clearly defined. One class, multiple students. This is the essence of a relational model, organizing data into separate entities and defining how they relate to each other. The big question is, how do we technically create this link between tables? We will talk about this later. We need to talk about SQL now. SQL means Structured Query Language. This is a programming language used to manipulate, manage, and query databases. And before all the snob developers come into my comment section saying, "Oh, SQL isn't a real programming language." Well, it is a real programming language, and it is also called DSL, or Domain Specific Language. It means that the language SQL is specialized for a specific domain application, managing data here. And you may have heard about famous SQL dialects like MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQLite, Oracle, and even SQL Server. There are 4 basic operations in SQL. The first operation is the select. This operation lets you retrieve data from the selected table. For example, you will need to use this query to retrieve all the data from the student table. Select star, so all the properties, and you have the from students, which say that students is the selected table. You may also want to filter the students, like getting the list of all the students whose last name is Du. So here the query will be select star, so all the properties from students table where last name equals Du. And then you have the insert operation. When you have new students, you will need to add new rows into your table. And this is the query to do it. This query says insert into students table, then you have to specify which properties you're gonna fill in. Here is first name, last name, and birth date. And then you're gonna say which value you want in each rows. So here, for example, this query will add 2 new rows into your table. The first one is for Laura Durieux, and the second one is for John Du. As we are human, we may make some errors while creating data. And to rectify a mistake, we can use the operation update to edit existing rows in a table. The example query here shows that we want to update the students table and set Jane as the new value for the property first name. And we have a where, because we don't want to apply Jane to every rows in your table. You don't want all your students to be called Jane, right? So we're going to specify that we want this update only on the rows where the first name equals John and the last name equals Du. And to finish, the delete operation. Well, sometimes you need to delete data from your database. And happily and sadly, this is really easy to do. Even easier to delete an entire table or database. So be cautious. Here, the query shows that we want to delete from the students table where the first name equals to really old and last name equals to student. And I must agree that the example here is not really realistic. And I would like to take 5 minutes to pay respect to all the fallen databases. Rest in peace. And a little word for my developer colleagues. If you never restored the backup, you've never backed up. Whoa, it looks like a lot of information, but don't worry, it's okay if you didn't get everything from here or you're still not a professional SQL developer. I mean, this is not the goal of this video. Now that we know what a database is and we have basic notions of SQL, we can face our last problem. How do we know which student is in which class? Well, for that, we need to add a new property or column to our students table, which is class ID. But where does this ID come from? Well, I didn't want to show too much information, but you have to know that this is a good practice to have a column named ID in every table. It will be the unique identifier for every row, what we call a primary key. And this is really important, especially when you have relationship between tables. You might ask yourself, why not use first name, last name as unique identifier for the students? I mean, it's okay, it would work. Like the primary key can be something else than an ID column. But then you have to be sure that 2 students will never, like ever, have the same name, because otherwise your database relations will be broken. That's why it's easier to have an ID column where you are sure the value will always be unique for every row. So now, if I have a column named class ID, I will be able to indicate in which class which student is in, because the value inside class ID will always correspond to an ID from the classes table. Okay, if I need the data of a student and the data of the class, how do I do? Ladies and gentlemen, here is the last point of this video, the joins. In SQL, when you need to retrieve data from different tables which have a relationship, here, for example, the property class ID, we temporarily join them. The word temporarily is so hard to pronunciate, I'm sorry. So basically, you create a new temporary table by merging data from several different tables. Here is the example query. Well, it can be overwhelming to see that the first time, but don't worry, it was for me too. Let's try to build this query together. First of all, you know that you want data from the students table. You know that the query looks like this. Select star, so all properties from students table. table. Okay, but let's say that we change our mind. Let's say that now we only want the last name and the first name of every student. So we have to change the query, and it looks like this. So we select first name and last name properties from students table. We're gonna explicitly say which properties we want from the table students. Great! Now the only missing piece is the classes data. This is where we will start the join between the two tables. This query selects the first names and last names of students by joining the students table with the classes table, linking each student's class ID with the corresponding ID. Unfortunately, it's not gonna work. Do you know why? The problem is the database don't know where the ID come from students table or classes table. If you remember, both table has a column ID. That's why we will give a name to both tables to be able to distinguish columns having the same name. It is clear now that we are pointing to the column ID from the table classes. But with this, we still don't have the data from the students class in our results. And for that, let's add the last puzzle piece. We will add a third property line, classes.name, which means that we're going to retrieve the name of the class in which the student is alongside their first name and last name. Oh my God, we did it! We joined two tables together to be able to retrieve the data from both of them at the same time. To recap, a database is a data collection. SQL is a programming language used to manipulate, manage, and query data from a relational database. You have 4 basic operations: select, update, insert, and delete. And when you need to apply an operation on 2 or more tables, this is called a join. To recap the joke, this is a wordplay between tables of a database and the technique of joining tables. Well, it looks really not funny now, but that was the risk. Thank you so much for watching this video until now. I hope that everyone is okay, that no brain exploded. If you liked this video, don't hesitate to hit the like button and to follow this channel, of course. A lot will come later in the future. Of course, I don't have a text for this last part, so I'm kind of trying to speak in English the best I can. And also, have a good day. Bye-bye.